1927 masterpiece Metropolis gave silent film viewers their first glimpse of a gleaming, mechanical, and entirely invented science fiction universe. The film, from German director Fritz Lang, opened the door for a film genre that, although is commonly thought of as an American phenomenon, has always had wonderful roots and representation all over the world. Nearly 100 years after its release, the film's message of the dangers of man's meddlings with nature and the horrors of playing God resonates strongly even today. Film critic Roger Ebert noted that Metropolis is one of the great achievements of the silent film era, a work so audacious in its vision and so angry in its message that it is, if anything, more powerful today than when it was made. The science fiction of France is as varied, artful, and complex as all French cinema. The post-apocalyptic nightmare of 1963's La Jetee was the basis for the American film 12 Monkeys, directed by Terry Gilliam, starring Bruce Willis. In 1965, France produced Alphaville, perhaps the first movie representation ever of a sci-fi detective mystery. The bizarre and surreal Fantastic Planet, made in 1977, shows a world of absurdity that we can't help but feel should be teaching us something, if only we could figure out what that something is.
He was frightened. He had heard about the head experimenter and was prepared to face the mad scientist, a Dr. Frankenstein. Instead of whom he met a reasonable man who told him in a relaxed way that the human race was doomed. Space was off limits. The only link with survival passed through time. A loophole in time, and then maybe it would be possible to reach food, medicine, energy.
Cyberpunk author William Gibson once described Japan as the most inherently futuristic of all nations, and speculated that the reason for this was the massive societal changes Japan underwent in the 19th century to catch up to the technology of Western powers. Tokyo's gigantic urban sprawl looks like a city from the future. Japan's neon-drenched cityscapes have influenced the look of science fiction for years, most famously in Blade Runner. The most iconic of all Japanese sci-fi characters, Godzilla was the first foray into the near-constant theme of the destructive power of technology for Japan. Cautionary tales of technology's potential destruction of mankind are very common in Japanese science fiction, and it can be easily surmised that this is a reaction to the devastation of the nuclear weapons that devastated Japanese towns in 1946, ending World War II. 1988's Akira, widely considered the quintessential masterpiece of Japanese animation, is set in a post-apocalyptic Neo-Tokyo, ravaged by nuclear war. ESP, telekinesis, and laser cannons dictate the action as we witness the travesties that scientific weaponization can inflict upon a society. Perhaps the most commonly recognized facet of Japanese sci-fi is that of mecha, or giant robot anime. Large mechanized war machines battle it out in shows like Voltron, Robotech, Macross, and Gundam, and is the most popular and long-lasting genre of Japanese sci-fi of all time.
Ah! That's Mr. Kaneda, you punk!
On the subject of the science fiction of Soviet Russia, film analyst Robert Barry notes that, from the very beginning, Russian communism was cosmic, intergalactic in scope and ambition. Earth's gravity would never be sufficient to rein in the forces unleashed by the revolution. Indeed, in no other nation and at no other time did science fiction cinema play such an important political role as Russian cinema during the Russian Revolution and the Cold War eras, both as anti-capitalist propaganda and as patriotic Marxist inspirations. In 1924, Soviet Russia's first fully homegrown outer space fantasy was released, the first communist science fiction film to be based on a post-revolutionary text, Aelita, Queen of Mars. The movie, about a young rocket engineer building a great spaceship to Mars, was a massive cultural event for Soviet Russia. Film historian Ian Christian argues that Aelita was the key film of the new economic policy period. The film was so widely loved and successful that Aelita became a common name for parents to give their daughters in Russia for decades to come. Shortly after, a propaganda film entitled Interplanetary Revolution was released. The film is widely drenched in not-so-subtle symbolism, as the heroic and brave Red Cosmonaut defeats the evil and oppressive pig dogs of Mars, complete with capitalist swastikas emblazoned on their backsides. In the background, Lenin sits godlike in his throne, overseeing all in his communist omniscience. During the space race era of the 1960s, a Soviet film entitled Cosmic Voyage depicts a family unit traveling in a rocket to the moon named Joseph Stalin. Cosmic Voyage pulls no punches in its state-driven imagery, with CCCP proudly plastered on the rocket's hull. The movie was to be an inspiration for Mother Russia's people, and perhaps contributed to the victory that was Sputnik, the first satellite ever launched into space. Other, more recent Russian sci-fi films include the original Solaris, released in 1972, a hauntingly quiet cerebral study that would be adapted as an American movie in 2002, much in the vein of Kubrick's 2001. In 1979, Stalker was released, the story of a man who works as a guide through a mysterious area called the Zone, where the normal laws of physics no longer apply. The story was used later for a hugely successful video game of the same name, and was spun to be a statement about the dangers of nuclear power, most likely in response to the Chernobyl incident of 1986. The following is a trailer for the aforementioned Interplanetary Revolution. Okay, I'm sure you probably get the point. From the grandeur of Metropolis to the political hammer of Interplanetary Revolution, I hope you've enjoyed this short tour through the science fiction of a few of the places that we don't normally think of as havens of the genre. Keep in mind that science fiction is a reflection of our societies and ourselves, and this is true of all people, of all nations.